Oh, for fuck's fucking sake. God, Google, you are the fucking worst. I don't fucking care, man. What the fuck is this even bullshit? Hi, welcome to Sharp College Football. We're back for some more previews. Today we're going to do the Michigan Wolverines as we run through these. If this is your first time tuning in, we're running in and previewing the 2023 college football season from an advanced stats perspective. Most of the stats you're going to see here are going to be from Bowron, an advanced stats system I built for college football. It's built on the same the data from the folks that provide data to the College Football Playoff Committee. I've got like 11 or 12 years worth of this data now. It's not bad. We, of course, added FCS last season as well. But as we run through doing these, we'll also have some advanced stats that are not from Bowron. I'll call those out and sort of point out why I'm using them when I do use them. Yeah. But I'm excited as we run through these, as I keep pointing out, and I think I've talked about in the other two previews that I've done previously. One of the interesting things about this college football season is it feels very wide open. Some of the teams that we would talk about sort of being at the top of college football the last couple seasons, like Georgia or Alabama, have made some interesting offensive coordinator hires that I think are going to open things up a little bit at the top, and maybe put. And for a program like Michigan, just like we talked about with LSU last night, or in the last video, a program like Michigan that is not likely, and when when you were looking at like the 2019 version of college football, or Alabama in 2020. And to some level, you could maybe even argue Georgia last season, because Georgia's offense did put up some really good numbers last season as well. Michigan's not ever going to get there with Jim Harbaugh. They're just not. That's not going to be who they are. And they recruit decently, but they're not like an absolute juggernaut in recruiting. So their chances of catching, like a 2019 Ohio State or a 2019 LSU or Alabama, were pretty minimal, right? I mean, Michigan was never going to get there. But everybody else has kind of come back to earth, come back to where Michigan's been hanging out, if you will. And that, I think, and this is the first season, I think, look, Ryan Day's offense has really fallen off significantly since the 2019 high. And I think there's a reasonable argument that he needs to get his running game going again, I think, in order to fix that, as well as the pass. They were still really good at throwing the football in 2019. They were just an excellent running team. And you could argue, with the offensive line coach hire that they made last season, that they are, I think, hoping to maybe get there, as well as needing a defensive coordinator, but which I still do think they have in Knowles, and you should see even more improvement over where they were last season. But I think one of the interesting things about, this Michigan squad right now is that they are sort of poised to, and they have a ton coming back this season. They are sort of poised to, in a world of, where college football's come back to earth, where the distance between the very top teams and the teams that are merely very good is much smaller. Michigan suddenly has a chance to get into that conversation as being one of the very top teams. Michigan, Ohio State could slug it out with Georgia a little bit last season. They had the offense to be able to do that. Georgia's defense isn't quite where they were, and I do think, relatively speaking, Ohio State's defense had a decent game, that game. Georgia's offense was really good last season. And Michigan got really unlucky in their play. If you look at that, TCU benefited from Michigan repeatedly doing dumb things in that football game. And was able to hold on and win. But Michigan, I think if you look at where Georgia might be this season, if they might fall back to where Ohio State's offense was last season, that puts them in range where Michigan, is going to be able to hang with them. That's a really interesting thing in college. I think it's fascinating that college football for at least a couple seasons, from like the 2019 Oklahoma, or 2017 Oklahoma offense that really put up some huge numbers for the first time. And then, everybody, at the very top sort of like figuring it out and going for it at the same time. I think that was really interesting to see that in college football, but it did make it so that, if you were not going to be able to put up the kind of offense that Alabama was going to put up, you really had almost no shot. And then this season with, Mike Bobo being hired at Georgia, Tommy Rees at Alabama, the juggernauts have come back to earth. Gravity has come back and pulled them back. That leaves us like I said, this might be Michigan's best shot at a national this season right now. And this is purely on paper. Of course, one of the other big offensive, because there are, some of those guys that were OCs at Alabama, like Steve Sarkisian, are now head coaches at Texas. Texas is still recruited really well. They have a really good coaching staff. They figure out the quarterback, and we'll talk about them, in a preview not too far down the road. They could put together some big numbers. Ohio State could. Ryan Day was the play caller in 2019. He could figure it out again. But that said, this might be Michigan's best shot at a national title in a long time, coming into this season. They have just so much coming back on both sides of the football. There is a little bit of uncertainty at OC. And I want to call that out, because they got a first-time play caller in there, and mileage may vary anytime you have somebody that's brand new to the job. as far as calling plays goes. But I think if you're a Michigan fan, you should feel really excited coming into this year. The schedule is largely manageable outside of Ohio State. The Big Ten doesn't, project to be a monster, going through. And so Michigan should, have a shot to be in really good shape, I think, by the time, to get into the playoff again. And this time, if they were to get matched up against a Georgia or an LSU, it just... They may be in a position to, only open as a fairly small underdog, in those games. That'd be great. I think if you're a Michigan fan, you've got you have a really good shot there. You don't have to, look, TCU got all the luck in the world. You might only need to finish +1 on turnovers and you could potentially come away with a win. So let's run through some of the numbers. Of course, John Harbaugh is your quirky, kind of weird, not always in a good way, head coach at Michigan. Good football coach, probably not somebody many people would probably want to, maybe some people, I don't know, want to hang out with. Maybe not. Honestly, like if he was the football coach, I don't think a lot of Michigan grads would want to hang out with John Harbaugh. Anyway, you can just leave it in the comments if you find that obnoxious. They finished it. They projected them at number 3. They finished at number 5 last season. They were number 4 in 21. They do sit at number 19 overall at coaching and development, and they haven't put out. Michigan, like I talk about, like Michigan, even though they've had two seasons in the top 5, the distance between a 5 and a 1 and a 4 and a 1 is often pretty large. So they're not. They recruit okay. They're at 18 overall in recruiting. They're in their last 2 seasons, but I do think, I think when you talk about, their coaching and development, like they just haven't crushed it, that's what sort of we talk about. Like they haven't put up like the really, really big numbers that we've seen other programs put up in the past couple seasons. They're at number 5 in Bill Connolly's returning production. That is a huge reason they are projected at number 3 is they just bring so much back on both sides of the ball. Number 11 in special teams. That's a really solid one for them too. Michigan's not going to have some, like we talked about, some juggernaut offense, so they can't afford to leave points on the field and special teams. So I think another top 10 performance for them, especially, fringy top 10, get into the top 10 performance for them in special teams, I think would be a really big win for them. And then let's turn around and go right into the offense defense. So offensively, they finished at number 10 last season. They have a new OC in, Sharon Moore is your new offensive coordinator. He's been on staff with them for a while. Matt Weiss was your play caller last season after Josh Gaddis went to Miami. Josh Gaddis is actually now at Maryland, which was, I wasn't sold on the hire when Cristobal made it, but truly, like I keep saying, these last couple seasons I've been holding the programs that aspire to win national championships to the standard. Like if you're gonna do it, you're gonna have to put together one of the really big top 3 offenses in college football if you're gonna make that move. And that's been true, but it's becoming less true. And that, scoring was down last season, which I've mentioned a few times, right? Scoring per drive was down last season for the first time in a couple of years. That might hold again this season. Scoring per game is likely going to be down with some changes that I think are going to limit the number of drives, limit or reduce. I shouldn't say limit, reduce the number of drives teams have in a game. Anyway, with more, like I said, with anytime you get a brand spanking new play caller in, mileage may vary on that. Play calling is an actual skill. Some guys are really good at it. Some guys are not. Harbaugh has largely been able to insert pieces and the offense still sort of hums along with what they want to do. They return just a massive amount on this side of the ball. So, I think you should take some faith in that. And on the offensive side of the ball, returning production is more correlated with next year's output than recruiting. So they were really good at drive efficiency last season, number 8 in drive efficiency. They did a really good job putting together long drives, stringing together plays to put up points. Only number 22 in explosive drives. I think if you're going to talk about something they could really improve on coming into next year, they do need to potentially be more explosive if they want to put up a bigger offensive number, maybe creep up towards that top 5. They're going to have to find a way to become a much more explosive offense. Number 4 in play efficiency. This is the least important of the core 4 beta rank metrics, but still carry some weight. This is your yards per play outside of explosives. They did a pretty good job here as well. Number 7 in negative drives, not a lot of 3 and outs, not a lot of turnovers. This is interesting. I mean, Ohio State did this back in 2019. It's not often you find a non-service academy leading the country in effective rush, but Michigan did last season. They were just a tremendous rushing team last year. The difference I would say between that 2019 Ohio State offense and this offense was that Michigan didn't throw the ball as well as they did. Sitting at number 45 in effective pass. They're going to need to pick that up a little bit, I think, if they want to improve on this offensive number, become more explosive and just more of a threat in the passing game. That'll open things up for them quite a bit if they can do those two things. Because as it is now, you can... look, teams knew what was coming, and Michigan still largely was able to impose their will. So it's not as if like teams are like, oh, we can't stop. I mean, they stacked the box knowing what was coming, and still, Michigan largely got to do what they want. JJ McCarthy's your returning quarterback. Oh, sorry, they were at number 8. Michigan was at number 8 offensively in 21. JJ McCarthy's your returning QB, 64.6 completion percentage, 8.4 per. You just like to see them be able to, the passing offense contribute more into it. He's a decent quarterback. He's really mobile. Added about 300 yards in the run game last season and a couple TDs. Somewhat his threat there, I think, adds something as well, but they're gonna need to, they're gonna need to be able to pick it up a little bit more in the passing game, and a lot of it's going to be on him. They were really good on the offensive line last season from Football Outsiders, offensive line metrics that are advanced-ish. They had 2.8 line yards attributed to the offensive line. That's number 19 overall. They had a 4.4% sack rate. That's more of a quarterback number. That was a number 29 overall, so that's good. And maybe even getting that down a little bit would help as well. They're number 4 in returning production next season, 84% coming back. That's a really big number. This offense has a shot to, I think, improve quite a bit. Look, if Moore can work out as the OC, I don't see any reason that this offense can't make a run at, at that, in that 5 range, in the 5 range. Defensive, I forgot to do there's your new offensive coordinator. Defensively, Jesse Minter's your defensive coordinator. I got updated. He was at Vanderbilt before. Number 7 defensively in beta ranked last season. They were at number 12 in 21. They did a pretty good job at drive efficiency, sitting at number 10. This is preventing long drives, like finding ways to get off the field, not give up points, use the field to your advantage. Number 8 in explosive drives. They did a good job of containing big plays. All of these, of course, are scaled to where the offense is. Offenses in modern college football are just ahead of where the defense is. I want to give you a sense of like if Michigan faced up against the number 1 offense in drive efficiency, what that might look like. So, the scale here is 1 would be as good as the offenses are at this. Even the very best defenses in college football are going to give up points to the very best offenses. Number 10 in play efficiency, they did a good job limiting yards per play. 15 in negative drives, they could definitely afford a few more turnovers, a few more 3 and outs here. That would certainly help them along the way. And might lead to some improvement. If you're Michigan and looking at this number at number 7 overall here, I mean, you're really hoping to potentially get like a top 3 defense next season with as much as they're bringing back, and the fact that they have continuity with the defensive coordinator again. They had 23.2% negative drives. That's a pretty good number overall. As we were talking about, that puts them right around the same range as LSU was last season, and fairly close to even where Georgia was in creating disruptive plays. They just didn't do as good of a job. They were at 33.8% in third down percentage, and that hurt them a little bit. Teams were able to sustain some drives against them a little bit more. They didn't force as many 3-and-outs, and that certainly hurt them with the negative drives number overall. But again, like they're at number 17 overall, and Bill Connolly's returning production. That's 78% coming back. That's a great number for them. They should be sitting pretty, I think, in a lot of ways defensively, with the amount of continuity and the amount they have coming back on that side of the ball. The schedule, so Michigan's playing no FCS teams, so you'll see 12 games here, so don't add one. Obviously, if you added one, you would end up with a number greater than 12, which would be difficult to do. That would be some very bad math. But the schedule's largely favorable, as you can see here. Michigan projects, over 11 wins. Teams in this range. Michigan really only has one game where they're not a heavy favorite, out of the gate, and that's against Ohio State late in the season. And they do get that game at home, which is certainly going to help. They open up with I think what has been sort of a feisty, interesting East Carolina team, but I would expect Michigan to be able to pretty easily handle East Carolina in that game. UNLV. Certainly there have been some moments when it almost looks like UNLV is figuring out in the past couple seasons, but has never quite really put it together. Michigan's going to start out with 4 straight home games against some pretty mediocre opponents, following that up with Bowling Green there. 2 teams that are projected to be in the bottom 10, in beta rank coming into the season. And then, East Carolina's, almost near 100, which isn't, 88's not bad for a Power 5 team, if we're being honest. Rutgers, though, projects to be really bad again. Kirk Ciarrocca's, oddly enough, he's in his effort to be the offensive coordinator, at Minnesota twice, Penn State once, and now Rutgers. He's certainly been around the block as an offensive coordinator in the Big Ten. But Michigan should really be able to handle Rutgers. Shiano hasn't really been able to get things going there. Any of these games, Michigan's going to need to turn the ball over like 5 or 6 times for any of these to be close. Then it does get a little tighter. There's a shot Nebraska, I think over... I don't want to say over. There's a shot Nebraska ends up, beating out expectations, which are fairly low for them coming into this season. With Matt Rule there, I think defensively Rule's built his Baylor programs and Temple programs defense first. I wasn't madly impressed with the offensive coordinator hire for them. I think that, that's saying that, like, that's not a huge shock for, a Matt Rule hire. On the offensive side of the football, Michigan, this game could be a little closer than we have it. It is, certainly it's at Nebraska, and as I've said a few times, these naive spreads is scoring overall with the rule changes will be down a little bit. This could be closer to like 21 points here. Minnesota's been pretty fun, I think, under PJ Fleck. The defense certainly has under Rossi has been the better end of the bargain, since their breakout year, of course, was driven by Ciarrocca and the offense, but then they really have not been able to figure out at all since. The defense has been pretty good. They need to, I don't expect them to suddenly show up and knock Michigan around, even though this game will be at home. This is a game where you start to get into the range of like, all right, if things are a little tighter, you start to get below around like 17 points or something. Some bad luck could get Michigan, so they definitely need to not, against Minnesota, say against like Purdue, and Michigan State, they need to not have a really, really bad day, and they should be fine. Go out and have your really bad day against Rutgers and Nebraska or something, and you should largely be okay. Indiana is a team that, since the good days, has not really been able to put it together really since Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator there, and Kane Womack was the DC. Indiana hasn't really been able to figure it out. Michigan State, I'm still not sold on Jay Johnson. I think Scotty Hazelton will largely get the defense in a better place than they were last season, but I don't think Michigan should have too much trouble here. It is a rivalry game. It is on the road. Don't turn the ball over 3 times, Michigan, and you should be pretty fine in this game. Purdue, Ryan Walter's staff, I think is interesting. I think they're going to have a hard time keeping the offensive continuity going, which is what largely drove Purdue. But Walters and staff should be able to improve the defense, which Purdue wasn't ever quite able to sort of put together. Penn State, I have to say, I'm surprised Yursich hasn't worked out very well. But Drew LR might be able to really get that offense going and open it up. Yursich has in the past had some pretty good offenses that he has called. So I do think that there is an opportunity for Penn State to put it together more offensively. I have to eat a little crow here before I get to Penn State. I wasn't sold on Manny Diaz coming back as DC. The defense, for the past couple seasons for Penn State has been the driver under Brent Pry. Diaz was really good last season. The defense was really good last season. They have a shot. I think if this is, if scoring is down, this could be a little tighter for Michigan, and it is on the road. This is certainly, of course, like unsurprisingly, one of the games to watch out for. Maryland, this is an interesting one. Like Josh Gaddis is now your offensive coordinator at Maryland. Mike Loxley, I think, recruits pretty well, and they've been sort of fun offensively. Maryland has. They certainly have their work cut out for them on the defensive side of the football, trying to figure that out. But again, this is I will say Penn, like as Michigan starts out with a ton of home games to start out the season. They do have, they do get Ohio State at home, but they've got a couple of their tougher games are on the road. I don't expect Maryland to be some juggernaut opponent for them, but Maryland is a team that can cause you problems on a bad day. Certainly not a game that I think Michigan can afford to overlook by any stretch. But Michigan does, as much as, Michigan doesn't have any glaring weaknesses on the defensive side of the ball to call out. They weren't like LSU, who just previewed who struggled to stop the run last season. Michigan's a pretty balanced defensive team. They're going to return a lot of players. They should be largely fine to be able to slow down Maryland. Just don't go out and have a really bad day. Ohio State, though, of course, that's going to be the really interesting game. Ohio State will have a new quarterback in. It'll be interesting to see if Day is able to get the running game going. You're going to be able to get the offense sort of unstuck from the level that they have been at, which is still very good, but not in the range that, he started out his career hitting. The big question, of course, I think coming into this year is where Knowles has the defense. And that's going to, I think, make or break the Buckeyes. You could make an argument, make or break Ryan Day. This game. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and I'm not an Ohio State fan. I didn't grow up here. And I do think, like Ohio State fans are none too pleased over the last 2 years. They got very used to beating Michigan, and Day could be in really hot water if things don't work out. For him this season in Ann Arbor. But this should be a tight game. I think Knowles is going to get the defense in a much better place for the Buckeyes. I think it is, if you're a Michigan fan, you're really hoping Day's offense is sort of sitting in the same range. This game's probably, my guess is, because I think Knowles does improve the defense, I think this game's more likely a toss-up by the time we get to it. Than not. I think Michigan's still going to be very good, but I think Ohio State has a little more upside coming into this year with Knowles. And then it's just going to come down to where Day has the offense, coming into this year, whether he can sort of get things unstuck. But overall, this is a really favorable schedule for Michigan. It does finish a little tougher with those 2 road games. Really, you could argue like with Michigan State on the road, and then Penn State and Maryland also on the road before you get to Ohio State. It does start pretty soft. They'll have plenty of room to grow, but they won't need it. There should be a very experienced team, but they're going to have to really turn it on down that back stretch, and not make mistakes. And not, I think the tough thing is you're looking down that back stretch, and that's where they cannot afford to have a bad game in those back 3, because that's where they could drop one. So they're going to need to be on, to really almost, the entire month of November, which they, great teams will be. And Michigan certainly showed last season they could put it together. Yeah. So that's the Michigan Wolverines. Like I said, like if you're a Michigan fan, you should be really excited. I think Michigan's one of those teams, like I said, with like Brian Kelly at LSU. Like Brian Kelly was never going to put together an offense that was going to catch, Steve Sarkisian's offense at Alabama, or a Lincoln Riley offense at Oklahoma or something like that. Like he was just never going to get in that range. And so the fact that Alabama and Georgia aren't going to be in that range this year really opens things up, I think, for teams like, or for coaches like Brian Kelly or Jim Harbaugh, who are really solid college football coaches, just were not going to get on the like big points, the big offense bandwagon. So, like I said, yeah, this should be a fun one. I think it does set up like this matchup. Like all of a sudden Michigan feels like they are with this much returning, with the kind of continuity they largely have on staff, I think they have to feel really good, coming into this year, feel really confident coming into this year. The onus is really on Ohio State to and you can talk yourself, like, look, the Manny Diaz defense at Penn State's really good. They get LR going and, unstuck on the offensive side of the football. Penn State can be in the conversation and maybe even play more than spoiler, in there for sure. But they haven't been in the range in the past couple seasons with Ohio State, with, Michigan. I think it'll be interesting to see this season whether they can, but it really is, the Big Ten, there's a pretty decent sized gap between where Michigan and Ohio State have been, and everyone else. And so it might largely come down to that game all over again. And Michigan doesn't get, it's not like Wisconsin was a bit of a pushover last season, but they're not getting anybody. I mean, the West, and let's be honest, the West hasn't exactly been full of juggernauts. If Wisconsin's not up, the West hasn't been that tough. In the Big Ten comparatively. So they're but Michigan doesn't draw Wisconsin this season. I think they've got a really good shot to go into that game in Columbus undefeated, or not in Columbus, in Ann Arbor undefeated, against an Ohio State program that, is going to be feeling much more of the pressure, I think, than they are, coming in. That's a good position you want to feel. So, I just got a question. How long has it been since Michigan started out the season? I don't know that the entire time I've been doing beta rank, Michigan's started out the season ahead of Ohio State. They finished a little bit behind Ohio State last season, even though they did beat them. Them's the breaks with advanced stats, right? We're looking at all the games, not just one game. But Michigan comes in. Yes. They just return an absolute monster set of production off of last year. So yeah, I don't know that they've ever finished ahead of Ohio State in beta rank. And they've never, but some of that is like Ohio State's just been on a bonkers run, right? Sorry for Michigan. Michigan fans watching this that I'm talking about the Buckeyes, but they've been on a bonkers run and Michigan's finally put a stop to it. Right. And that's exciting. I think if you're a Michigan fan, or the run is, at the very least, even if you lost this year, the run's over, and you established something reasonable, some reasonable sense of that the world has some sort of occasional parity to it. But should be, like I said, it should be a fun year. Michigan fans, I don't think that you're going to learn a ton. The things that I think I do try to call out things to look for early in the season is how the offense is really flowing. The schedule, like I said, isn't overwhelming early on. They're not going to get East Carolina, I believe, had a decent defense last season. You might get something in that Nebraska game. Keep an eye on how they're doing in that Minnesota game, because Rossi had a pretty good defense the last two seasons at Minnesota. I really do like Michigan State's defensive coordinator, Scotty Hazelton. He's going to have to improve. They were sort of a middle of the road Power 5 defense last season. But but we might not. I mean, they're not going to likely get to face a really, really good defense until they get into Penn State. That'll be interesting to see, because I think that, like, we may not find out a lot about Moore as a play caller, until very late in the game, because there's just nobody on here unless Matt Rule gets it really figured out, or, Minnesota's really good again. That's likely to slow them down a ton. Now, of course, you could go in there and have a couple turnovers and, things are closer than you'd expect, and you'll definitely learn something at those points, I think, too. But yeah, anyway, yeah, I mean, they did have a soft schedule last year too. Benjamin's right on there, but I think you could argue, like, that's true of Ohio State too. I mean, unless Michigan and Ohio State are scheduling somebody great in non-conference, like the Big Ten's been a little, with Penn State kind of like hanging back a little bit. It's just been a little bit soft. And I say this is like, this has largely been true of like the SEC the past couple seasons too. Like the distance between, Georgia and everyone else has been very large, and there just hasn't been anybody. I mean, like, or in some of those Alabama years, like with the exception of like that great LSU year, there really hasn't been anybody kind of in that range. So anyway, I'm excited. This really profiles, I think, is one of the most exciting, interesting college football seasons in a while, even as we head towards like what you might think of as like the great consolidation, when it's just, I don't know, 2 leagues and that's it. Anyway, I'm going to be out traveling for a family matter this week. I will be back on Friday, and I will preview the Buckeyes, which will be fun. Again, like, it'll be fun. We'll talk about, I promise you, Michigan fans, I'll talk about Michigan during the Ohio State preview. A lot, because you beat them, and it's gotta be dry. I mean, it's definitely like, it's almost like you could say it's like if think of like Ryan Day as like Eeyore, and he's got like a dark cloud following him around Columbus. Like, that's how people feel in Columbus after just losing twice. Like, they just got so used to winning and beating Michigan. So revel in that, Michigan fans. Enjoy that. Anyway, let's do the credential stuff. So I'm Rob Bowron. I'm the econometrician, chicken behind BetaRank. You can find all the stats you saw and a lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. You can find me, and I promise I will answer questions once a week, maybe more, on BetaRank. I'm just not going to tweet a lot. It's a depressing hellscape on Twitter. You can also find me at sharpcollegefootball.com. I'm going to see how useful that is. See if I have to like pay to use the bots that I build to be able to tweet out sports stats. That sounds really stupid if that's the case. But I mean, hey, when you decide to buy a profitable business and, drive down your ad revenue by 59%, like, sometimes, you got to make it up somewhere. And apparently it's me. I have to help them make it up if I want to be able to tweet out college football stats in an automated fashion from a server somewhere. You can also find us at 12 Pack Radio. We have a Pack 12 podcast. You can find the back episodes of that podcast at sharpcollegefootball.com/12 Pack Radio. We're going to get that kicked off and going again and start previewing the Pack 12, soon to be the Pack 10, soon to be whatever. I don't know. I'm excited for this college